Um, all right, I think we're ready to go. Let me just organize all my windows so that I've got everything in the right spot. We've got a few people in the thing and good to go. Well, g'day, folks. It's Workout Wednesday. No, what's this? Wednesday Lunch and Learn. We're here again for another session. We're still doing the Power BI adoption roadmap. Here's the little articles that we're doing. As usual, I will copy this and paste it in the chat for those of you that want to look at the documentation. If you ever need to refer to anything that I'm talking about here, it's all here in the documentation. And today we're covering content delivery scope, and we'll be also going through a few of the different usage scenarios, which is part of kind of content delivery scope. It's also part of content ownership that we spoke about last time. So feel free. This is a interactive session if you want it to be, or feel free to just listen along. No worries either way. Always happy to get people's personal experiences and feedback around different areas. So this should be a good one. This is lots of interesting sort of usage scenarios and for Power BI, right? This is how we use Power BI for different size organizations. So you could be a small organization and have different usage scenarios to a really large organization. And the way that content delivery is kind of broken up in the Power BI world, or the way that the kind of Microsoft have expressed it, is that it's kind of broken up into 4 different kind of scopes, if you like. So the 4 different delivery scopes, according to Microsoft, they've got this concept of personal BI, a concept of team BI, a concept of departmental BI, and a concept of enterprise BI. So what they're saying is that focusing on the scope of a delivered BI solution does refer to the number of people who may view the solution, but its impact is more than that. Scope strongly influences best practice, right? How we deliver these things suitable to those different size teams and those different areas. Your scope has a direct correlation to the level of governance, such as the requirements for your change management or documentation or support. If you're doing personal BI solution, you don't want to have large, like highly regulated, high governance, high documentation needs when you're only dealing with a small number of users, because you're going to spend all the time doing documentation and not actually building anything. It's also going to affect like the types of training that you get, the types of mentoring and kind of user enablement pieces that you do is going to be directly related to what types of BI solutions you're building. Support and licensing, of course, as well, because you've got these, and Microsoft Power BI licensing is quite confusing. You've got premium, and then you've got pro, and then you've got free, and then which one is suitable for which scenario. So these are all the things that we're going to be discussing today. We spoke a little bit about content ownership last week, with the difference kind of between content delivery and content ownership. Content ownership is much more about who has responsibility over these things, who drives the vision of that area, or who drives the strategy around it. Content delivery is really about the people on the ground building the stuff. This is about the people using the data, as opposed to the people kind of creating and owning that data, right? So this is content delivery is around how people are going to use your reports, and so they're interrelated, obviously, and so we need to consider both pieces. Not all data and solutions are equal. Be prepared to apply different levels of data management and governance to different teams and various types of content. Standardized rules are easy to maintain. However, flexibility or customization is often necessary to apply the appropriate level of oversight for your particular circumstances. So I think that's an important point there, right? Is that this is going to be, again, a consideration between standardization and flexibility, and we have this, that kind of Microsoft concept of flexibility at the edge and standardization at the core. you're going to probably have different usage scenarios, particularly in very large organizations, the banks of the world, and large enterprises. You're going to have different usage scenarios. Some people are going to be more, some teams are going to be more suited to more a personal BI or maybe a small team BI scenario, whereas others are going to be, there's going to have usage scenarios around enterprise BI, right? So the obvious kind of example that I would give here is board reporting is always an enterprise BI style approach, right? You rarely would casually kind of build board reporting for enterprises because boards take their reporting pretty seriously, and they need they have very strict governance around the way that data needs to be done, because you're going to be asked certain questions around it, and it's at the highest level of the organization. So you don't want to be giving your CEO, as they go into the board meeting, kind of dodgy data or bad reporting, right? So you need strict governance, regulation, and that kind of stuff around that kind of thing. Whereas maybe if you're just doing your, how a particular innovation team's working, or that kind of thing, you might do that. I'm just going to quickly hit the mute button on people. If you've got a small team, then obviously they might not need that kind of regulation as well. So let's have a look at the different types in terms of scope of content delivery. They've got a little image here, this kind of pyramid of the types of consumers we've got. I reckon I can zoom in a little bit here because I feel like I'm not taking up enough space. Make it nice and easy to read. Right, how does that look? That's a bit better. So in terms of the number of target consumers, so personal BI, you're sharing to your friend, that kind of thing. Team BI, you might be sharing to your to your own team. Departmental BI is going to be slightly bigger scope in terms of number of users, and then enterprise BI, that's everyone across the whole organization as well. So just to break these down a little bit, firstly, let's talk a little bit about personal BI. So personal BI solutions are, as the name implies, intended for use by the creator only, effectively. So sharing content with others isn't really an objective. Yeah, so you're building stuff for yourself. Therefore, personal BI obviously has the fewest number of target consumers. Maybe you share it with your best friend. I don't know. And this is an important thing to think about from a licensing point of view with Power BI as well, right? Because if you're only building stuff for yourself, you can get away with Power BI free. There's no licensing requirement. That's where the paywall exists in Power BI is in sharing. So Power BI free, you can do a whole lot of stuff in Power BI free if you're only building reports for yourself. And if you're in a scenario where you're only really building reports for yourself, but then maybe you PDF them and you share them in meetings and things like that, but it's really kind of still only you doing that, you can still just do that from Power BI desktop or out of the service from your personal workspace. So you still only use Power BI free. So if it's really just down to the scope of you, Power BI free is an appropriate license for you, and that's what it's designed for, to allow people to use this tool for themselves. Now, of course, as soon as you need to share something with your team, then you are talking about a Power BI Pro license. So Team BI collaborating and share content with a relatively small number of colleagues who work closely together. So you're all in the same team or bucket or whatever, and so. Or maybe you're just a small organization. So your Team BI scenario is going to be appropriate for that. Departmental BI, so you've got a large number of users now who have, like you're sharing across teams, and so you've got a whole of business unit type delivery. And then of course enterprise BI. The thing we mean by that is broadly across organizational boundaries to the largest number of target users. Enterprise content is most often managed by a centralized team and subject to additional governance. That's because you're sharing it to so many different people, especially in very large organizations. In contrast to the four scopes of content delivery, there's like an inverse relationship to the number of creators, right? So I think it's the relationship with respect to the number of people, right? So there's a one-to-one relationship for personal BI and the number of users because you're building stuff for yourself. And so therefore one content creator supports a one-to-one relationship with the users. So with Team BI, you've got one content creator for a small number of users, and then all the way down to Enterprise BI where you've got one content creator sharing across a larger number of users. their explanation for this little inverse triangle here. Personal BI represents the largest number of content creators because any user can work with data, okay, using a business-led self-service BI methods. Okay, interesting. So they really are talking about that ratio of creators to users. Although managed self-service BI methods can be used, it's less common with personal BI, which means that everybody is using their own data. There's no need to create a managed service around that. Team BI. Colleagues within a team collaborate and share with each other using a business-led self-service BI pattern. It has the next largest number of creators in the organization. Managed self-service BI patterns. We're going to talk about these patterns in a second. May also begin to emerge as skill levels advance. Okay, so you start to go, so you're really going with a business-led kind of self-service BI pattern when you're talking about Team BI, and it might start to shift into a managed self-service BI pattern later. So a business-led self-service BI pattern is where we spoke about with content ownership. You've got business owning the data and owning the content type thing. In a managed self-service BI pattern, you might have someone else owning the data model, for example, and then the business people do the reporting. And so they're the difference between those two patterns. Departmental BI, that's a smaller population of creators compared to users. They are likely to be considered power users who are using sophisticated tools to create sophisticated solutions. So your managed self-service BI practices are very common in this scenario when you're building departmental BI scenarios, and they're highly encouraged. And then enterprise BI, I see. So this is also about skill level. They're kind of implying that your departmental BI has a smaller population of available people because the skill level required to build that, they're more sophisticated. You might be starting to use some external tools in Power BI. So you've got things like Tabular Editor and DAX Studio and all those other cool external tools. Smaller population of people are potentially going to be building that. So they make this point a little bit clearer when they talk about enterprise BI. They're saying it involves the smallest number of content creators because it typically includes only professional BI developers who are in the BI team, in the COE or in IT. So you've got a smaller population of people who can achieve that outcome. And so I think that's a consideration there when you're talking about enterprise BI. We introduced the concepts of business-led self-service BI, managed self-service BI, and enterprise BI in the last article. Let me just quickly remind us of what that looked like. So that was in our content ownership article. We had this little image here that we spoke about our business-led self-service BI, our managed self-service BI, and our enterprise BI. So this business-led this concept is fully decentralized BI where everybody owns their own data and they create their own reports. On the opposite end of the scale, you've got enterprise BI where BI team or the COE or IT or there's a team responsible and they own all the data and they build all the content. And then your managed self-service BI is in the center here where you've got data ownership on the IT side and report building on the business side. Okay, and then we'll scoot back here, upside down triangle. We did that. Okay, some organizations also equate self-service content with community-based support. It's the case when self-service content creators and owners are responsible for supporting the content that they publish. So this is an interesting scenario that you need to consider, right? If you create content, who supports it? Okay, so if I'm out there in the business, in a business-led self-service kind of BI scenario where I'm building my own stuff, am I also responsible for supporting that content, or is then that support handed over to the centralized IT team or anything like that? We do talk about user support. There's a whole section on sort of user support and the different support scenarios. But this is where you need to start thinking about that scenario specifically, right? Because you've got and they're calling that community-based support. Yeah, so anything self-service is also has a community-based support associated with it. And so that means you need people to know where to go to get support and all that kind of stuff. When we talk about, they talk about there's a clarification on sharing in here. I'm gonna skip over that. They're basically saying when we say sharing, we're talking about sharing content, not sharing features. But yeah, I don't think we really need to cover that piece. Okay, so let's look at our content delivery scope for personal BI. So, what is personal BI? How are we going to? How are we going to? What's the scenario in which we do that, right? So, personal BI is about enabling an individual person to gain analytical value. Let's add that into our little list here because I think that's a really important point. So it's enabling an individual person in your organization to gain analytical value. It's also about allowing them to more efficiently perform business tasks through the effective personal use of their data, information, and analytics. It could apply to any type of information worker in the organization, not just necessarily an analyst or a developer. It could be anybody who's dealing with information. Sharing of content with others isn't really the objective of this scenario, as we've already kind of discussed. Personal content can just reside in Power BI desktop or in a personal workspace in Power BI. So you get your My Workspace. Usage of the personal workspace is permitted with a free Power BI license, which we already discussed as well. Characteristics of personal BI. So if you're looking at this scenario, here's kind of the characteristics you're looking at. The creator's primary intention is data exploration and analysis rather than report delivery. So I think that's interesting, right? So you're building stuff to kind of play with your own data. You're not really trying to build a report for somebody else. Content is intended to be analyzed and consumed by one person, and that is the creator. Yeah, so you're building stuff for yourself. So, I mean, all of my reports that I build for myself are always heaps messier and like chaotic because that's kind of just the way that I am when I'm just building stuff for my own personal use. I like put slices in all sorts of weird places. I've got all sorts of stupid visualizations that only I understand. That's really what personal BI is about. I really like doing personal BI for myself because obviously like not just when I'm not just using Power BI to build for other people, I'm using Power BI to manage my business and to explore interesting data sets and to do all that kind of stuff and build demos and that kind of thing. So I'm often just playing around in Power BI. And the approach is completely different to, when I'm building a formal report for an end user. And, like my team can probably testify to the fact that I'm very process orientated. I like to, we've got a strict process around, well, we try to have a strict process around the way that reports get built for our customers. But when it comes to building my own stuff, I'm just like drag and drop, let's go, So there's a big difference between those two scenarios. The content's exploratory proof of concept. So we talk about that a lot in our business, creating a proof of concept. So you've got this exploratory proof of concept that may or may not evolve into a project. Yeah, so this is in your experimentation phase. So you're really building something that is an experiment, that is kind of something to play around with. When you're building a personal BI solution, here's some guidelines for being successful. Consider personal BI solutions to be like an analytical sandbox. Yeah, that has little formal governance and oversight from the governance team. So don't put too many strict rules around people building stuff in this scenario. Yeah, this is really a sandbox scenario. So the more governance you put around it, the more restrictive you are, the harder it'll be. And for people that are trying to do that stuff, they'll be more dissatisfied with kind of the service that you're creating there. Although it is still appropriate, obviously, to educate your content creators on governance guidelines, right? If there's security, if you're dealing with sensitive data and you're enabling personal BI, you need to consider the implications of people, creating that. You need to educate your users because security really comes with your biggest vector, your security vector in data is people, right? People, they create a silly report and then they email it off to the Age or whatever, like they do silly things with data. And so so security in data is 99% about educating people. And so you still have that is valid in this scenario. So it's not just about, hey, go for your life and I trust you to do all the right things. Valid questions to ask include, can the creator export the personal report and email it to others? So there you go. Email it to the Age. Can the creator store a personal report in a non-organizational laptop or device? So there's this concept of where data gets stored. What limitations or requirements exist for content that creates sensitive data? So exactly as we kind of discussed. Have a look at the techniques for business-led self-service BI and managed self-service BI. Okay, so we will talk about that. They're highly relevant to help content creators create efficient and personal BI solutions. Analyze the data from I will have a look at that in a sec. Analyze the data from. So if you're doing activity logging, then you can have a look at the activity log and look for where personal BI solutions appear to have expanded beyond the original intended usage. Okay, so this is an interesting one, right? So you can potentially use logging to look at reporting. So you've got people. So this is where you're looking at shared content for people's personal. So here it is, detecting a significant amount of shared content from a personal workspace. That's somebody kind of not using their personal workspace the correct way. So personal workspace is kind of your personal BI sandbox. If you're sharing a whole bunch of content out of that personal workspace, then that's probably a candidate to move to some other BI usage scenario, right? Because that's not really the idea behind the personal workspace. It's not really building stuff to share. And so you need to think about that, because the risks associated with that is when the person leaves the organization, you turn off their account and then IT goes and deletes it because they've got a policy or whatever. There goes that content, right? You're going to have a lot of, it doesn't go forever necessarily. There's lots of interesting things in Power BI where you can recover lost workspaces and stuff. Workspaces actually kind of get soft deleted. I don't think they ever get completely deleted, but you're doing a lot of PowerShell and backend API work to get that data back out of a what we call like an orphaned workspace, where there's no user anymore and that workspace gets orphaned and it has no owner and it doesn't appear to anybody when Power BI gets logged into. So that's the danger of these kind of personal BI things. So let's have a look at the usage scenarios for personal BI. We've got a nice little diagram here, so I'll just get a copy of that. We'll talk through the diagram. Hopefully it'll give you a link at the bottom of the... Okay, so should I zoom in? I think I should zoom into this diagram. One note. How can we go? All right. So, private analytics for an individual. This is from, if you're looking for this is under the usage scenarios for personal BI. Let me just give you the link here as well in the chat. Quick question. Kenneth had a quick question for the thing. As PowerPoint with integration, was it ETA Q1? Yeah, I think it's later in the year. I just had a discussion with some PowerPoint people. I don't know if Kenneth is still here, but PowerPoint integration has been delayed till, I think, Q4. I want to say Q4, but I don't know for sure. I can look it up, though, if you're still around, Ken. Okay, there's the usage scenarios. That's where I got this diagram from. Okay. So private analytics for an individual. So you've got a content creator. Here's our content creator. They build a Power BI solution and they're using Power BI desktop to create that. So they're getting queries. They're getting their source data, usually probably directly from wherever that lives, whether it's a source system or whether it's a data mart or folders or the cloud or whatever. They're using Power BI desktop. They publish that PBIX file into their own personal workspace. So this is what's supported. You can have reports, you can have dashboards, you can have Excel workbooks. You're creating a data set when you publish that report. You can apply sensitivity inside your personal workspace. You can export stuff, you can print stuff, and you can set up alerts off dashboards. Okay, so there's quite a bit of functionality in a personal workspace. No sharing scenarios though, right? Just the content creator can look at their own reports in the mobile app, looking at the personal workspace. System oversights will apply though. So that's that activity logging, looking at personal workspaces. Okay, is there anyone sharing stuff out? So the usage scenario doesn't include sharing really in this scenario. And that means if you only need this scenario, this person only needs a Power BI free license. So that's really important. You can use on-premises data gateways to schedule your refresh. There's also this concept of a personal data gateway. To be honest, I don't even know why they exist. They literally, I've never seen a recommendation for someone to use a personal gateway. I don't know if any of you guys use personal gateways and you can think of a scenario. I would say 100% of the time, use an on-premises data gateway and do it that way every time. Yeah, personal gateways are not a good idea. So Yeah. So there's lots of interesting information in that thing, but really your authoring tool is going to be Power BI Desktop, and you're going to be creating these reports, dashboards. You might publish your Excel workbooks into there, and not really sharing it with anyone. So that's personal BI. Okay, back to the other thing. Oops, clicked on the wrong one. So let's talk about Team BI. So Team BI is focused on a team of people who work closely together, obviously, and are tasked with solving closely related problems using the same data. So, hoik. Collaboration and sharing of content with each other inside a workspace is usually the primary objective here. Due to this work style, team members typically will have a Power BI Pro license or a PPU license, a Power BI Premium per user license. The content's usually shared among the team more informally as compared to something like a departmental or an enterprise BI. The workspace is often sufficient for consuming content with a small team. Doesn't require any publishing or distribution as an app, for example. You're basically just using the workspace as your content repository. You don't have a formal publishing process. There isn't really a number of specific users. There isn't a specific number of users when team-based delivery is considered too informal. Each team can find the right number that works for them, right? So teams are going to work out what sorts of workspace content they need for that. Characteristics of Team BI, and we'll have a look at the team usage scenario as well. So the first one is content is created, managed, and viewed amongst a small group of people who work closely together. Collaboration and co-management of the content is the highest priority now, okay? So our priority is around co-management. You know, we're working together to build the same types of stuff. Formal delivery of reports may occur by report viewers. So especially for managers of the team, but it's usually a secondary priority. So what they're really saying here is that the manager might be a report viewer, you know, like you might set your workspace access for your managers to only be review, and then the people are creating content and the manager really only needs to view it or whatever. You're going to have some kind of, there's not really going to be many formal delivery scenarios though. You're not publishing reports and reports are not always sophisticated or attractive. Functionality and accessing the information is what matters most. So in these small team scenarios, you're not necessarily trying to build the world's most beautiful report. You're trying to build something that's functional and works and people can kind of work on together. Let's have a look at, I'm going to swap my order of things here before I do the guidelines for being successful. Let's have a look at the usage scenario for Team BI just to reinforce this idea. So here's my diagram. Okay, so we've got our content solutions. They build Power BI. It's the same scenario. We've got Power BI Desktop is our primary tool. And they're querying, mashing up data from our source data the same way. They're publishing this PBX file up into not a personal workspace now, but a proper workspace, which means that you now got workspace administrators, right? So people who are responsible for administering the members of the workspace, setting up users, all that kind of stuff. You've got Teams integration now available to you because you've got a formal Power BI workspace. You can do all the same kinds of stuff, but you also have this additional thing, which is data flows. You can have a data flow associated with the workspace. So a personal workspace, you can't have a data flow. You have different pieces of things that are available to you now. I think they've added endorsement compared to the last one. Let's have a quick look. No, so there was no endorsements in this one. And so you've got more functionality from your workspace. You've got workspace access, obviously, endorsements, exporting alerts. Now you've got data lineage. So data lineage is like, if you're creating data flows, you can also see how data goes back to the source system, which is really, really useful in some scenarios where particularly we've got complex kind of source data that's going through a few different steps, or you've got complex kind of transformations that might be happening. You can use data flows to see the lineage of that. It's really, really awesome, actually. It's a very impressive little feature that I don't get to use as often as I'd like. You can print. You've got subscriptions available to you now inside the Power BI workspace, and you've got usage metrics. So you've got this concept of how many people are using reports and that kind of stuff. So you've got your workspace viewers who could potentially look at their reports inside the mobile app. You're potentially going to have a situation where report creators reuse data sets to create new BI solutions using a live connection to Power BI Desktop. Because of this is in a workspace now, you've got that kind of extra functionality available to you, or using Analyze in Excel. So you want to create new Power BI reports off your existing data set, or you want to create new Excel reports off your existing data set. Both of those are now available to you. And of course, you've still got system oversight happening, so you can see who's using what, that kind of thing. So this is your standard kind of usage scenario for Team BI. This scenario down here, we're starting to now get into like a managed self-service BI scenario, because you've got people who might create data sets and other people who might create reports. And so you're starting to sort of get a little bit more mature and a little bit more advanced in terms of your capability. Okay. Content delivery scope. We're down to Team BI. Okay, guidelines for being successful in Team BI. Ensure that you've got, now we spoke about the Center of Excellence, the COE, is prepared to support the efforts of self-service creators publishing content for their team. What they're saying here is make sure that the people who are responsible at the high level, your IT, your security, your executives, are on board with self-service creators publishing content for their team. Because if they're not, then you're not in a self-service BI scenario at all. You're in a formal managed BI scenario, right? So, or an enterprise BI scenario. So to be successful in this, they need that support from the Center of Excellence. Make purposeful decisions around how workspace management will be handled. Workspace strategy is one of the most complex areas in terms of like decision making, I think, in Power BI. Workspaces can't, like, there's a concept of workspace sprawl, and how do we stop everybody from creating their own workspaces, and how should we create workspaces? And it gets complex because everybody goes, okay, what we'll do is we'll create a workspace for every team. So they go, okay, there's team 1 workspace, team 2 workspace, team 3 workspace. And then they're like, but hang on, we're running a project and team 1 and team 2 and team 3 are all working on it. And the reporting needs to go to all 3 of those teams. Where do we store the data set? So then I will create a project workspace. So then you've got a project workspace. And then you say, well, the managers of all those teams also need to be able to do HR reporting on their annual leave liability. So that's not a project, that's something else. That's a functional kind of workspace. So then you create a manager's workspace. And so then you've got managers' workspaces, you've got team workspaces, you've got project workspaces, and so different types of workspaces for different type of content. And then where do you put the data sets? All this stuff starts to become quite confusing. So you need to think about how you're going to manage your workspaces. And it's a conversation that's unique to every organization. And it's something that the bigger you are, the harder you fall type thing. And if you just kind of let it go sort of, all in too early, then you can find yourself in a situation where you've got a bunch of stuff that you might not necessarily, you've got to kind of backtrack, right? You've only got one Power BI tenant type thing, and you have to potentially do a lot of cleanup to make that happen. So workspace management is really, really important. Workspace is a place to organize related content, a permission boundary, and a scope for an app. Yeah. So that's really the scope of a workspace. Okay. So you're organizing related content. It's around permissions. So if you have permission boundaries, then you potentially need workspaces, and it's also the complete scope for an app. There's a one-to-one relationship between a Power BI app and a workspace. So if you want to build a Power BI app, you probably should build a dedicated workspace for that app. It's tempting yeah.
So we're getting very close to the artifact-based permissions. Isn't that supposed to be out this month? Having multiple apps in a workspace?
Oh, maybe. Yeah. I actually haven't looked into that, but you could be right. Yeah, that you could have multiple apps in a workspace. Ooh, that would be extremely exciting. Until then, it's still the scope for an app. But yeah, you might be right. You might be right, Andrew. Appreciate that.
We're a bit hesitant on that.
Yeah.
Making some decisions based on that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah, it's been a point of contention for a while because there are these scenarios where you want to potentially have multiple apps for the same team, for example. Um, as I kind of said, it's tempting to start with his one workspace per team scenario, but that might not be flexible enough to satisfy all those needs, projects and functions and that kind of stuff. Um, we're going to be looking. You really want to look at everything associated with anything to do with business-led self-service BI techniques and managed self-service BI. Right? This is a managed self-service. This is kind of a managed self-service BI scenario. So these are the relevant techniques that are going to help you and your teams create their own efficient BI solutions. We're really still talking about self-service scenarios. Okay, moving on from teams to departmental BI. Departmental BI is content is delivered to members of a department or a business unit. Content distribution to a large number of users is a priority for departmental BI. There's usually a much larger number of consumers now. We're talking about multiple teams. They're all content viewers versus a much smaller number of content creators who can do this for them. A combination of Power BI Pro licenses, premium per user licenses, and even potentially you're now in premium capacity world, depending on how big your departments are. But so, like the rule of thumb around premium capacity licenses is that if you've got more than a few hundred users, you're in capacity land. Yeah. And so it's just the maths works out in terms of there's two factors you need to think about. One is just pure maths on licensing. So, say your licensing costs is $10 US per month. It's a little bit more expensive in Australia and New Zealand. I know that. Then that's your $10 US per month. You've got, a couple of hundred users. That's a couple of grand per month. Then your premium capacity is like maybe $3.5 grand per month or something like that. Then so you're still under with a couple of hundred users, right? You need to be at 350 users, say, to hit that on just a pure month cost basis. But there is also a performance consideration here, where if you've got a couple of hundred users per month, they're all hitting, say, the same kind of reports, or your reports are a bit clunky, or they're a bit large, or you've got large data model, then you're potentially going to hit that threshold for getting to premium capacity earlier because of just from performance perspective. Now, I do see some organizations that have hit that threshold too early, where all they really need to do is just optimize their models and they can continue with Pro for a lot longer. But so that's the kind of the balancing act that you're dealing with here when it comes to thinking about your licensing from a premium perspective. Is that premium capacity is very expensive. Just the base one is $5,000 Australian per month at least. So you need that kind of couple of hundred users scenario for that to make sense. And then we haven't spoken about embedded and all that kind of stuff, but we're not really talking about that in this scenario. Okay, so with departmental BI, the characteristics are you've got a few content creators typically publishing content for their colleagues to consume across a wider area. Formal delivery of reports is now more high priority, right? We haven't really had this concept of formal delivery in the past. It's now ensuring that we're building stuff that makes sense, that consumers have the best experience, that you need to put a lot of thought into the design of your reports now because you're talking about a larger audience. Additional effort is made. Oh, that was a bit weird. Let's try that again. No, we've got some kind of horrible thing happening in OneNote. All right. Additional effort is made to deliver more sophisticated and polished reports. Following best practices for data prep, higher quality data modeling is also expected. So now we're really starting to get into the world that, many of you as sort of Power BI professionals or whatever are used to, right? So up to now, we haven't really thought about, we're not going through formal design, we're not going through formal data prep, we're not going through formal data modeling, we're not thinking about storage and that kind of stuff. Now we are, okay? So when you're getting to departmental level, that's where this starts to become more of a consideration. Needs for change management and application lifecycle management begin to emerge to ensure release stability and a consistent experience for all users, which is really a really interesting area. So change management. So this is about, okay, what's the formal process for making a change to a report or whatever. But then application lifecycle management, what's our release process? How do we make this change and then release it into our production environment, right? And do we go through a process of testing first? There was a really great session in Power BI Summit it was a Power BI DevOps session. If you haven't seen that, I think it was on day 2, and he goes through a automatic release and a release and automatic testing scenario where he's creates like these automatic tests and sends them off in Duck Studio, and then so you hit publish, and then the report gets automatically published via Azure DevOps, and then automatically tested against all of the test scenarios that you've created from in Duck Studio, and then automatically sent out to the production workspace, right? And so this is now getting into more formal deployment scenarios. This is kind of one of the areas where Power BI has been a bit light on, sort of in the kind of integration, like Git integration and that kind of stuff. We're starting to see some scenarios emerge where people are doing that now, which is really cool. So that's at Summit if you guys got a chance to see Summit. And then I did ask him about whether he'd done visual testing as well. And like where it clicks on different visuals automatically for you and make sure that the numbers are right. He said he'd been experimenting with it, but they hadn't quite gotten a formal process around it. But yeah, well worth checking out. There's like a 15-part blog that the guy had on how to set it all up. It's really cool. Okay, so let's have a look at our Departmental BI usage scenario. Departmental BI usage scenario picture. Here it is. Almost. No, it's not it. Try again. Let's go one. No, you got this. Copy image. Paste image. Hey, we did it. Okay, so we start again with our content creators. They're using Power BI Desktop. We've seen that. They're using the same source data. We're publishing our PBIX file into our workspace, same scenario for our workspaces, but now we're also potentially publishing that out to an app, to our app viewers, our larger audience, right? And so you've got this concept of app permissions, and so now you're starting to look at Power BI apps across when you're delivering to multiple users. You're going to have workspace admins and app admins and that kind of thing. You've still got the Teams integration here and the mobile app. The app viewers are going to be using the mobile app as well, so it's not just those report readers. You've still got this usage scenario down here with your live connection for people to create their own content in Power BI or to create stuff in Excel. But other than that, exactly the same as kind of Team BI. The extension here is this concept of an app. So that's where you're kind of maybe expanding your usage scenario out a little bit in the world of Power BI. In world of Departmental BI, I should say. Okay, guidelines for being successful with Departmental BI. This is long, so this is obviously the place where they've thought about it the most. Same thing again, ensure the Center of Excellence is prepared to support the efforts of your self-service creators, yeah? So make sure that you've got support from that Center of Excellence or those people who are running the show, otherwise you're not going to do that. Creators who publish content throughout their department or business unit may emerge as candidates to become champions or members of the COE, right? So these are the people who are at that more advanced level. They're publishing content that's potentially they're going to be in the COE themselves. Again, you need to think about your workspace management. Make purposeful decisions around workspace management. We've already spoken about that in the Team BI thing. But we also have this concept of about apps, right? We need to plan how our apps are distributed across the enterprise. So now we're not just talking about workspace management strategy, but also our app management strategy. An app can provide a significantly better user experience. It's just, you've got built-in navigation. You can put in more stuff into the navigation. They're just better generally. If you can use them, it's a good idea to. In many cases, content consumers can be granted permission to view content via the app only, reserving workspace permissions management for content creators and reviewers only, right? So people look at the stuff through the app. You're not sharing workspace access now for people to access content. You're sharing things via the app, which is really important. You can also, there's little subtle things inside app management that you need to think about, which is things like, is this app going to be automatically distributed to your customers or to your users? Or is it going to be something that they have to go and search for to find, right? That's a decision point in terms of how you're going to distribute your apps. So things like that, you need to have those conversations, probably as a part of the center of excellence. That's going to be, those people are going to be making those decisions around how that's going to happen. Key point: as the importance and criticality level grows, expectations for trustworthiness grows too. So that means people get more snarky about bad data the bigger the audience. So keep that one in mind. So they're going to be more important. They're potentially mission critical reports that large number of people rely on. There's going to be an expectation there for the trustworthiness of that data. As many of you, I'm sure, have discovered in the wild. Ensure that adequate training, mentoring, and documentation is available to support your content creators. Best practices for data prep, data modeling, data presentation is going to give you better solutions. So the content creators need to have that higher level of training. They need to get D. Watson in to show them how to do stuff, do some mentoring with them, that kind of stuff. Provide, or any of the other consultants here. But hey, it's my session. I get to promote myself. Provide guidance on the best way to use endorsements and certified endorsements. So promoted and certified endorsements. So now the endorsements really come into play here now, because we are talking about sort of, particularly in the managed self-service BI kind of scenario for departments, you need to endorse certain data sets, make sure those endorsements work, that are appropriate, and that you're certifying and promoting the right data sets. So you need to provide some guidance on that. So this is about providing guidance. Ensure the owner is identified for all departmental content. We spoke about this a fair bit last week. Oops, that's not it. Sorry, my copying skills are not great. Ensure the owner is identified for all departmental content. If you're delivering content out to a large department, someone needs to own that. People need to know where to go to get in support. Clarity on ownership is helpful when including who to contact with questions, feedback, enhancement requests, support requests. In the Power BI service, you can set the contact list property for many types of artifacts. I'm going to open this in a new tab and see what... Setting the contact information for dashboards and reports. Here's a thing on it. Pop that in the chat for you. So you can see here, when someone's consuming a report, they've got a contact there. Yeah, and you click on the contact and it automatically sends them an email. So you can set this contact information. It's under settings, under your different artifacts inside Power BI. So here's your contacts. Okay, so something to set when you're doing that. Okay. Contact list is also used in security workflows. For example, when a user is set to URL to open an app but they don't have permissions, they're presented with an option to make a request for user access. You would have probably seen that if you've used apps and you didn't have permission. There's a little button that says request access. I think SharePoint has something similar as well. And I'm never sure who that goes to. It just goes off, right, to the SharePoint administrator or something, and no one ever gives you permission. So it's like, but they have the link. So this is the same thing in Power BI. There's going to be a link there that's going to send an email to your content owner to say, hey, I want access. And you probably got a little, usually there's a little text box to say, hey, give me access, you mug, or whatever. Consider using deployment pipelines in conjunction with separate workspaces. So now you're starting to consider using deployment pipelines. Deployment pipelines for those of you, it's a fairly sort of obscure area of Power BI. So some of you might not know what deployment pipelines are, but this is an area of Power BI. I wonder if it's a premium thing. I want to say it's premium. Maybe it's not. I hope I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it is premium.
It's premium, right? Yep. This is why it's maybe a little bit more secure. But for those of you that are using PPU or you've got a premium capacity workspace, you can have this sort of dev, test, prod deployment pipeline. They're quite cool. There was a session on it at the Melbourne Power BI user group a little while ago. Actually, it started off being about buttons, and then it turned into deployment pipelines because Zoe knows everything. And so she showed a little demo of it, which is cool. I haven't done a huge amount of work with deployment pipelines, so if anyone has had some experience with them, it'd be interesting to hear what your experience is like. They do look quite good. I know a lot of people do lots of different things. This is similar to that scenario I was talking about before with auto publishing, but it doesn't have the test scenarios necessarily. So there's no way to execute automatic tests, which is why I like the other way, which is using DevOps pipelines. But this is like you start thinking about pipelines now. And so pipelines are automation that automatically, your developers never publish to your production workspace. They publish to the development workspace, and then it gets promoted to the test workspace, and then it gets promoted to the production workspace after certain scenario, like certain conditions are met. And that's that's theoretically how deployment should happen. Your developers should never touch production. Production is the responsibility of somebody else. And so you have this kind of concept of creating a pipeline to do that. And there's a couple of tools. There's this application lifecycle management, deployment pipelines, and then there's DevOps. Azure DevOps has similar kind of capability if you want to take it in that direction. You're going to potentially enforce sensitivity labels now, so data sensitivity, so governance things are going to implement information protection on your content. You're going to have, thinking about branding and consistent branding and styling, align with departmental colors and styling. Can also indicate who produced the content. You can have different styling for different levels of governance. So let's say if it's produced by the BI team, you can have a brand for the BI stamp of delivery, stamp of approval from the BI team versus branding, it's just random for people who are just creating their own stuff. So branding can be really big in your reporting for this kind of stuff. Small image or text label in the footer is valuable when the report's exported from the Power BI service to tell you where it came from. That's like that kind of breadcrumb type idea is an interesting one. Power BI desktop template file. So you can create a PBIT file, a template file to encourage and simplifies the consistent use of branding. We'll talk about that a little bit more in our user enablement stuff as well. And then again, this is going to be around business-led self-service BI and managed self-service BI techniques you're going to apply here for your departmental BI. We went through the usage scenario. We did. Cool. All right. Last but certainly not least, Enterprise BI. So Enterprise BI content is managed by a centralized team. So this is where we're fully managed now. It's subject to additional governance requirements, of course, because they're going to have strict scenarios around what they can and can't deliver. Content is delivered broadly across our organizational boundaries. So this is the largest usage scenario. Enterprise BI usually has a significant number of consumers versus content creators. Therefore, a combination of pro licenses and premium per user licenses or premium capacity licenses may be used. Characteristics of Enterprise BI delivery. So what does Enterprise BI look like? You've got a centralized team of BI experts managing the content, and they manage the end-to-end. They publish it for others to consume. This is where this is formal report delivery. So we're doing formal delivery of reports and apps, high priority to ensure customers or consumers have the best experience. Content is highly sensitive, subject to regulatory requirements, or is considered extremely critical. If you've got that scenario, then you're looking at Enterprise BI as your scenario here, right? Published enterprise-level datasets and data flows may be used as a source for self-service creators. So this is if you're creating content for self-service users to create on top of this kind of chain of dependencies to the source data. Then you're going to be having these enterprise-level datasets that people can consume. Then you're in enterprise land. Stability and a consistent experience for creators is important, or for consumers, I should say, is highly important. So stability of the platform, refresh stability, making sure the data's always there. You've always got ETL considerations when you're talking about enterprise delivery, because there's going to be all your mission critical reports are going to sit on top of this. Consistency of experience is going to be really important as well, because you're delivering to so many different people. You need to give them a consistent experience so that you don't end up in this kind of support nightmare where you create a rod for your own back, because everything's kind of slightly different. This comes down to standardization of the way that your reports are created. It might be as simple as small things like the way that you create slices, right? So, and where they're positioned on the page and how they get presented to the customer or consumer, and like do you use drop downs, or do you use lists, or do you use relative date slices, or do you use normal date slices, and do you use all those types of things become a consideration here now, because you're trying to create a consistent kind of user experience. You're building a user model that people are used to doing. So if they want to slice the data, they click on the slicer button, and then a slicer pane appears over the top of their thing, and they select all the slices. If you're doing that kind of, you give them the same way every time. Change management processes to review and approve changes before they deploy. You're going to be looking at application lifecycle management. All those types of things are going to give people that consistent experience as well. You're going to have processes for gathering requirements, prioritizing efforts, planning for new projects and enhancements. Yep. So now you're going to have formal processes, and keep an eye on this space, because I'm going to have potentially something around how our process stuff. We're going to put together like a little product that gives you all of these processes as a pack, hopefully. And so that's going to be how to gather requirements for a Power BI project, how to what do you need to do. So I've got my Power BI checklist at the moment. There's like a 100-point checklist on our website. That's kind of the first version of this kind of stuff. We're going to be doing new versions of that soon, where it's going to be much more detailed. We're going to have all of the whole Power BI development process built for you. So if you want to kind of, if you're interested in that, let me know, because I'll put you on the list. Integration with other enterprise level data architecture management services may exist. So now you're integrating with fairly complex architectures. Enterprise level architecture is never simple. Management services, you're going to have other people managing different services. You've got a lot more stakeholders. You've got a lot of lots of other Azure services and Power Platform products now come into play. You might need Power Apps. You might have Power Automate happening. You might have a virtual agent happening. And is all that integrating with Power BI? You've got all these other Azure services. You're potentially using Synapse Analytics. You're potentially using Purview. You're potentially using Azure SQL, Azure Data Lake. All of those things are very common to be dealing with, integrating with Power BI at this stage. And so you need to have those conversations with all those people as well that are having those, that are in that piece. So let's have a look at our usage scenario diagram for Enterprise BI. This is one of the more complicated ones, as you can probably imagine, because we've got lots of different usage scenarios. And bam. Okay. Okay, so when talking about organization-wide content distribution at scale. So many more users. You can see our users has grown over here, but we've got the same kind of scenario with content creators. They're going to be creating content, building BI solutions using Power BI Desktop and Power BI Report Builder. So now they've kind of brought in paginated reporting as one of the common usage scenarios for Enterprise BI, because everybody loves a PDF for some reason. So you're going to now have report creators using Power BI Report Builder and building those paginated reports, RDL files. Everybody loves SSRS. So two different kind of tools to build reports with now. Still going into our workspace. You can see the workspace is now wrapped in a premium capacity. So when you're dealing enterprise-wide, you're potentially going to be using the premium capacity because you've got that significant number of users. Your users could be in the thousands here if you're a larger organization. You've got the Power BI service obviously wrapping it all. You're going to be using apps to deliver that content out much more frequently. So you've got still the concept of people consuming things through Teams or the Power BI mobile app. You've still got our live connection down here for our report creators to reuse data. And you've still got our on-premises data gateway. So really the key thing here that they've added in for enterprise-wide is actually this using paginated reports. I wonder why. What's the difference? Do departments not use paginated reports? There's no paginated report here, right? No. That's kind of the only difference in those two scenarios. I think that's kind of interesting. But it is, you are talking about a much larger audience though. So there you go. Shelley's put in the checklist. Thanks, Shelley. Appreciate that. Right. So that is the enterprise diagram. Let's go back to our adoption. How are we going for time? Just going a couple of minutes over like always. Greg talks too much is the problem. All right. Content delivery. Zoom, 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 zoom. Enterprise. Okay, guidelines for being successful at enterprise BI delivery. I was going to cover governance today, but this was always going to take way too long, so that would have been silly. Governance and oversight techniques described in the governance article. We're going to cover governance next week, so there's lots to consider in terms of governance. But stay tuned next week for our governance session because that'll be highly relevant in this scenario. You're going to have licensing, particularly premium licensing now is going to come into play. So you're going to be talking about premium licensing, premium per user, premium capacity, aligning your workspace management strategy with your licensing and how you're going to do that becomes much more of a consideration. Plan how your apps distribute your Power BI content. So you're going to be using apps to distribute content. So you're going to have a plan around how you do that. You're going to be using sensitivity labels to protect sensitive data. So consider enforcing the use of those labels, and then how do you get those labels used by users? So you need to teach people how to do that. You're going to have a process for endorsements, right? Because this is now enterprise level. We're in enterprise grade land. You're going to be using certified endorsements for your enterprise BI reports. This is certified enterprise data set, for example. You need to have an announcement regime. Yeah, make it a common practice to announce when changes will occur. Surprisingly, a lot of people forget to do this kind of stuff, and it causes their BI teams a lot of heartache when they make major changes, or Microsoft goes and makes a major change, and you aren't aware of it, and you don't announce it, and then you're in a situation where people don't know what's going on. So use the different communication types. I don't think we've covered community of practice yet, so we will cover that in a future session as well. Include consistent branding on reports to align with departmental colors and styling. So that's the same one as the departmental. We need that consistent branding. Our lineage view is going to help us a lot when it comes to enterprise scenarios because you're going to be doing a lot of impact analysis. You're going to be constantly under pressure in terms of getting the data refreshed on time and all that kind of stuff. And so this is where lineage views are going to help you. And if you're using sort of that broader enterprise sort of tool set, so you're using Azure Data Factory and you're using Synapse Analytics, pipelines, and you're using all that kind of stuff, you're going to be doing a lot more of that kind of data lineage analysis. And so you need to be able to communicate that downstream to the people who own the content and the people who own the data sets. Super common scenario where you've got, you're trying to manage an ETL pipeline and it breaks for some reason. If you don't have good communication to let those downstream content users know that something's gone wrong or the refresh hasn't happened, or you just end up in this support nightmare, right? People get really snarky with the BI team because they haven't delivered their data today. We're all about delivering that data all day or each day on time, every time. Your it's really now we've moved over to the other side of our content ownership thing. Now we're all in Enterprise BI. This is a managed service. It needs to be treated like a managed service, and so you've got those scenarios are going to apply here. And then have a look at, we haven't covered system oversight yet. We will be covering how system oversight is going to help you. Double paste. Hang on, let me double back out of that. So we'll cover system oversight as well. So there's a few things that we're going to cover in future ones: governance, community practice, user support, and system oversight. They're all coming in terms of these lunch and learn sessions. So we'll cover that stuff. All right. Just quickly to wrap this up, I know we've gone a little bit over time, but I'll just quickly give you the considerations and key actions. I'm just going to paste it all. Sorry about all the words, but we'll just quickly run through it. Okay, so my head's over the top of this as well. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay. Ensure your guidelines, documentations, and resources align with your strategic goals defined for Power BI adoption. So, you're thinking about all these. This is for all scenarios now. So you need to make sure that you've got guidelines for each one of these scenarios, or think about the ones that you're going to do. Your scope needs to be clarified for content delivery in your organization. Who's it going to apply to? How are you going to align with your governance decisions? Make sure you're consistent about how that's handled inside your organization. Consider how to handle situations when a smaller team wants to publish content for an enterprise-wide audience. I think that's an interesting scenario, right? So you've got a small team, they're used to using sort of a team-based or personal kind of scenario. Let's say that one person now wants to publish that to the enterprise. What's the process they need to go through to do that? Will it require the content to be owned and managed by a centralized team? So we spoke about content ownership. So if you're moving, and that concept of transferring ownership from one person to the other, we kind of covered that last week. Is there an approval process? Governance can be more complicated when content delivery scope is broader than the owner of the content. So for example, when an app is owned by a divisional sales team, it's distributed to the entire organization. So how does that get approved to be distributed to your organization? So you think about your approval processes. Create helpful documentation for your community so that content creators understand when it's appropriate to use different artifacts. So when do I use a workspace? When do I use an app? How do I share? When should I use a direct link? When shouldn't I use a direct link? That's all the stuff that you need to create documentation for your users so that they use it properly. And then think about how you handle different licensing considerations. When is the scenario where people need a premium per user license? Well, if they need paginated reporting, they need PPU. So you need to think about that. And then how do they request that license? How do they get it on their desktop? Process for how workspaces are assigned, each license type, and prerequisites required for the type of content that may be assigned to premium. And there you go. We did it. We spoke about content delivery for Power BI. Well, thanks, folks. I appreciate your attendance again this week. It's great to see you all here. We will definitely be back next week to be covering, it's going to be governance. We're going to do governance. So governance is a really interesting topic. It's obviously a hot topic for Power BI people and for anybody working in data. So stay tuned for that one. I'll put it out on blast so that we can get as many people across to that one. First session. Oh, thanks, Kirsty. Appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. Got a thing. Got access to the recording. There's a department here really, Renault, that really needs to see this. Yeah, I'm putting all the recordings up on YouTube. I didn't do last week's yet. Sorry, I'm a bit behind on my upload schedule, but I'll put this one and last week's one up on YouTube, so they'll all be there, and I'll put it out on LinkedIn and stuff, and I'll give you the link next week when we're there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your attendance, and yeah, we'll see you all again soon. Feel free to hang around. I'm going to stop the recording. I'll hang around for a little bit longer, but yeah, go and do some work.